Although a small percentage of students with disabilities are identified when they are very young and receive services through an individualized family service plan, the school age years are the most likely time in life to be identified as a person with a disability. If a student was identified for early intervention services, usually it's for a significant physical or sensory disability, intellectual disability, autism, or developmental delay. Most students, though, begin school just like their peers, and they are identified as having disabilities only after they experience major difficulties in school. As a school professional, you have a responsibility to thoroughly understand what happens from the time someone expresses concern about a student struggling in the school through the steps of assessment and identification of students as eligible for special education services. Of course, rates of identification vary considerably from disability group to disability group, but high incidence disabilities like learning disabilities, mild intellectual disability, and behavior disorders are disabilities that are much more likely to be identified during the school years than any other time of life. Oftentimes, the demands of the school system for academic competence, that is, competence in reading, writing, and math, these demands expose disabilities that were not even evident in early childhood, as no one was ever asking a young child to display these academic skills. So where does the process begin? As we just reviewed, there are two primary ways in which children can be identified as possibly needing special education and related services. The system known as Child Find, which operates in each state, and by referral from a parent or a school professional. Each state is required by IDEA to identify, locate, and evaluate all children with disabilities in the state who need special education and related services. To do so, states conduct what are known as Child Find activities. When a child is identified by Child Find as possibly having a disability and as needing special education, parents may be asked for permission to evaluate their child. Parents can also call the Child Find office and ask for their child to be evaluated. A school professional may ask that a child be evaluated to see if he or she has a disability. Typically, the referral begins with a general educator, but it may also be initiated by a school administrator, a related service provider, a concerned parent, or another individual. Most often, referrals arise from a concern about a child's academic achievement and/or social behavioral problems. Pre-referral activities are used to screen students before more formal identification procedures are implemented. Based on the pre-referral assessment information that is collected, appropriate pre-referral intervention strategies are developed and implemented within the general education environment. The point here is to avoid unnecessary assessment and placements in special education if smaller efforts are successful. During this pre-referral period, teachers try different research-based instructional approaches to determine whether faulty instruction is the source of the problem. They also make basic accommodations to the instructional program and systematically differentiate instruction more intensively. If the intervention attempts are not successful, you have to at least try 2 different ones. A formal referral is made for evaluation to determine eligibility for special education. For example, if a child was behind in reading, a pre-referral intervention may be to ask the parents to read with the child each night for 30 minutes, and also provide the child with additional reading instruction at school. Providing practice and seeing if the child catches up in a couple of months is a pre-referral intervention. Pre-referral assessments and pre-referral interventions can be very helpful, and if the intervention is successful, it can be used to avoid a referral on for special education. The special education process formally begins once a child is referred for special education. IDEA 04 specifies that a child must be evaluated within 60 days of receiving parental consent or within any time frame established by the state. A student must first meet eligibility requirements for one or more of the 13 disability categories as identified by IDEA. It should also be noted that IDEA 04 includes a special rule for eligibility determination. That rule states that a child cannot be considered to have a disability if the determining factor is a lack of appropriate instruction in reading, a lack of instruction in math, or limited English proficiency. These factors have to be ruled out as being the primary determinant of the child's difficulties in school. Once the referral is made, evaluations are conducted by multidisciplinary teams made up of professionals who have expertise in each area of concern. Each member helps to evaluate the student's unique strengths and needs. For example, if a language impairment is suspected, an SLP or a speech-language pathologist is a member of the team. If there may be a hearing problem, then an audiologist participates, and so on. A school psychologist may give a standardized test. In addition, less formal assessments include observations, school records review, and every potential explanation for the low achievement is investigated, including possible health influences as well as social factors at home and school. Tests about a student's learning style are often included to help identify accommodations that may be effective to support the individual's successful access to the general education curriculum. You can see that numerous professionals provide input and information to the evaluation process. Once all of the information for the evaluation has been collected, educators meet with the parents to discuss results of the various assessments. Most often, evaluations are completed to answer specific questions. So the first question is, do developmental problems exist? Is a child not developing as one would expect? This could be academically or socially. And the one who answers this question, the one who completes this activity, is the general education teacher. Teachers should always be on the lookout for children who are not progressing as expected to see if we can help these children. They should always be screening their students, always be aware of their students' progress. If a child is beginning to fall behind, a good teacher knows that and wants to be able to see if the child might be helped through some special assistance. So if developmental problems exist, the answer is yes. Then we move on to number 2. If they don't exist, then we stop. So each of these questions is contingent upon having a yes answer to the previous question. The next question, are the developmental problems easily solved? For a long time, schools had what they called pre-referral intervention teams, and oftentimes social workers, psychologists, and master teachers serve on this team along with special educators. A pre-referral intervention team is a team of people who look at the case of the child who has fallen behind and provide suggestions to the teacher, and even might suggest some resources. And these suggestions and these resources are intended to catch a student up quickly. If the child quickly catches up to grade level expectations, it can be determined that the child was easily solved or that the problem was easily solved, and one stops there. However, if the child does not easily catch up, then we move on to question number 3. As I said, the law actually requires that 2 pre-referral interventions be attempted before a formal referral to special education is made. The third question is, can we use special education funds to solve the problem? Some people would write this question as, does the child have a disability? And the purpose of the case study evaluation is, of course, to determine if the child is eligible in one of the disability categories underneath IDEA. But in one sense, what we're really doing here is to see if we can use special education funds to solve the problem. And so we're interested in seeing if the child meets criteria for one of the special education categories so that we can use the extra resources that come along with special education to provide assistance to the child. Please remember this. Many more children get referred for special education services than are actually found eligible for special education services. So the answer to number 3 is no. More times than it is yes. Usually we cannot use special education funds to solve the problem even though a child has fallen behind and is showing developmental problems, and we know that these problems aren't easily solved. The question for number 4 is, what is an appropriate intervention plan? To answer this question, we'll require an IEP team to get together and use their best clinical judgment to develop an intervention plan. The plan on the IEP should help a child improve their skills so that their rate of progress improves. In other words, a child's rate of learning should be higher after they get an IEP than it was before. The final question is the intervention plan, is the IEP working, and should it be modified? There's no shame in developing a plan that doesn't work, but there's a lot of shame in developing a plan and then never investigating whether it has worked well for a child. It is critical that people engage in the final activity, which is monitoring the child's progress. If the assessment indicates the presence of a disability as defined by IDEA, then the child is eligible for special education services. The team, including the family, will develop an individualized education program, monitor the student's progress, and evaluate the student and his or her progress throughout the school. In addition, the school will ensure that the procedural safeguards are in place to ensure that the student receives a free and appropriate education. So far, we have covered the traditional process for referral, assessment, and decision-making in special education. From 1975 to 2005, this system was not really challenged. It made sense to people. But during the past 6 or 7 years, there have been more and more concerns raised. These include, it was a wait to fail model. We don't intervene when a child is falling just a little behind when the prospects are good for catching up. Nope, this model requires the child to fall way far behind, and the criteria for the special education categories are so stringent that a child must fail before they get any special help. Critics say that this is really messed up. We should make a child wait until they fail to get help. Too much time and energy and resources are spent assessing the problem. The referral process, including assessment and evaluations, take a lot of time and cost a lot of money. And I already mentioned that in many cases, children are not even eligible for special education services at the end of it all. Wouldn't it make more sense to take all of these resources and instead of evaluating children, help the children learn? Another concern relates to children who are not making adequate progress but do not meet the eligibility criteria for special education. Students who fall between the cracks don't get the help that they need. It's pretty self-explanatory. A child is referred for special education services but is not found to be eligible, and the process does nothing to help them. They were referred because they were behind, and the likelihood is that they will continue to fall even further behind as they did not qualify to move on with the process. Some children who are eligible are moved outside of the regular education system into a special education system, and this is the final concern with this model. Regular educators no longer have instructional responsibilities, and so the process does little to expand the capabilities of the general education classroom to meet a more diverse student population. And the concern is that special education classrooms become dumping grounds for students who struggle in the general education setting. Unfortunately, as far as general education teachers are concerned, once removed from the immediate environment, children are out of sight and out of mind. As a result of these concerns, there was a call for more preventative models of special education, where the focus is on providing special assistance as soon as the child begins to fall behind grade level expectations. This is where the three-tiered models such as RTI and PBIS come in. We'll learn a little bit more about these in an upcoming week. If a student does not qualify and is found ineligible for services, remember the reasons why the student was initially referred. Concerns for a student's progress are a very viable component of the referral and cannot be dismissed because a student is not eligible for services underneath IDEA. So what can you do? If the student is not deemed eligible for services, this does not relieve the team from providing supports to the student. The team is responsible for ensuring that the student has opportunities for school success. This may include identifying strengths that can be used to teach and designing accommodations in the general education classroom that may include additional resources or universal design supports that can benefit the entire class. The team should consider the student's eligibility for protections from discrimination and the development of a 504 plan if the student's eligible. In any case, the team may establish a monitoring system for the student to determine if further supports are needed or if additional assessment is appropriate. Concerns about student progress were made evident during the referral process, and those concerns simply cannot be dismissed. All students can and should be able to succeed given the appropriate supports and services. Remember, this is a team process, and the parents are probably the most important team members. If the parents do not agree with the evaluation results and subsequent programming, then they have the right to mediation. If mediation does not address the conflict between the parents and the school, then parents have the right to a due process hearing in which they can hire an attorney to help with the legal process, and a judge makes the final ruling on the case. During this entire process, there is an assurance of confidentiality. Individuals on the multidisciplinary team should keep all results during and after the assessments within the team. Legally and ethically, the child's assessment and programming should never be discussed with anyone outside of the team. As we just learned, if the child qualified for services, you'll need to review the information gathered and possibly further assess for program planning as a part of the development of the student's IEP. If the child did not qualify, then you'll still want to review your information for program planning so that you can put supports in place to help the student be successful. The purpose of assessment for program planning is a good practice, good teaching. In our next section, we'll cover the IEP.